r/AskReddit. Redditors who clean up crime scenes. What's the most bizarre thing you've witnessed? Crime scene cleaner here. My first suicide cleanup was quite an experience. Man shot himself in the head in his garage. I'll never forget needing to use pliers to pull teeth and skull fragments out of the drywall behind where he sat. All that blood and brain managed to make its way more than 50 feet across the garage. Most disturbing though, was his pickup. We chose to take it to our company wash bay to pressure wash it and make sure it was as clean as possible. I cleaned it myself and was satisfied that I had done well. Inspected for blood and couldn't find anything, so I began driving it back to the owner's garage. On the way back a slight drizzle began and switched on the wiper blades. Imagine my horror as a chunk of brain streaks across my newly cleaned windshield. I pulled over quickly and cleaned it up, but it still makes me sick to think what would have happened if it didn't rain that day. This man's poor wife or daughter would have been met with that sight and been crushed again by the impact of suicide. That 10 years ago and I'll never forget it. Now I triple or quadruple check every job. My younger brother died by shotgun suicide 6 months ago. While I'm beyond thankful I didn't see the aftermath, my mind wanders to some pretty dark places wondering how bad it must have looked. Morbid, I know, but grief will influence you in strange ways. Reading your comment was oddly healing? I don't know if that's the right word. Closure inducing? Not sure how to word it, but wanting to know his final state likely stems from the things concerning the situation that I'll never have answers to. At any rate, I'm grateful for people like you who do what suffering families cannot. Thank you for choosing this line of work. It's sadly needed and profoundly appreciated. I don't clean up crime scenes, but I do remove the deceased. I can get into more accurate detail of the deceased, but here's some general stuff. Hoarders are a lot more common than they really should be. First of all, and it's never a clean hoard, it's piles of junk covered in several types of urine, shit and vomit, molds I've never seen before, and probably insects that haven't even been discovered yet. I understand when the emergency services don't want to be in that kind of house longer than they have to, but I'll never forget having to ask them to help me because I couldn't distinguishing what was actually the deceased and what was just a piles of random shit that looked more human than the deceased did. People will warn you bodies will bloat, and touching them the wrong way will make them leak. But the image you're conjuring up doesn't even hold a light to what it can be like. Insects skittering when you delicately lift a 400 pounds deceased onto your cot. Because one wrong move and they will start oozing. Oh. And the ones who had pets who were so desperate they had to eat their owner. Staring into the eyes of a big, brown-eyed mutt who is happy to finally receive human contact. And all you can't think about is how the deceased is missing their entire face. Poor things were just hungry. But it's unsettling. Family member did heavy duty cleaning including crime scenes. A guy shot his head off with a shotgun. EMTs were supposed to pick him up literally, but missed a large chunk of brain behind a couch. That was when said family member decided to find other engagement. I occasionally work on the weekends for a funeral home. It's decent money for what is essentially 2 hours of call out work when their normal staff is off. Last year I was called in at around 5 in the morning. A 30-something-year-old guy had killed himself, shot himself, in a pretty small 2-bedroom apartment. That wasn't the bizarre part at all since I've seen it before on call-outs. What was bizarre was what was in the apartment. Literally thousands of documents, piled on the floor, on a desk, on shelves, of people's financial information, credit card statements, bank statements, personal data, etc. Probably 3,000 folders with all this stuff in it. Even where there weren't piles of folders, there were just loose papers, magnetic cards, surveillance cameras. It was just the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And of course, some of these documents and folders had blood and brains spattered all over them. Didn't matter to me though, since the detective on scene had said it was fine to take the body. The police had to clear a path by collecting the papers from the route we would take from the door to the apartment to where he was. A couple of months later, it came out that the guy had over $1 million in cash and Bitcoin. Apparently the state police were onto him. My best friend used to have this job. Most of the bizarre stuff was cleaning up suicides. Found a guy's full intact mustache across the room when he blew his head off with a shotgun. One guy tried to kill himself by shooting his stomach with a small caliber pistol. He didn't die immediately, so he wrote tons of whacked out stuff on the walls with his blood, then finished the job. Was dispatched to a vehicle versus pedestrian call a couple months ago, and when we arrived on scene it was like something out of a movie. Dude was running across a fairly busy 4-lane road and was hit by a car traveling about 55 miles per hour. After his head went through the windshield of the first vehicle, he then proceeded to be thrown into the opposite lane and was ran over and dragged about 20 yards by another vehicle. Once the coroner was on scene with traffic investigations, we proceeded to pick up his organs bit by bit. It was a fantastic anatomy lesson. I used to work in forensics, picking up decedents as well as assisting the medical examiner in conduction of the autopsy, not necessarily cleaning up the scene, but I've seen a guy who, during some kind of psychotic break, completely castrated his entire package. He then proceeded to stuff the entire package into his mouth and down his throat. He then slit his own throat. Did all of this with a cheap kitchen knife in his shower. Cause: exsanguination complicating transverse carotid and jugular severance. Manner: suicide. Edit: just want to address anyone who is asking about it potentially being a homicide and give a little bit more background info. I was reluctant at first to give out too much detail, but here is what I'll offer. There was a call to a Section 8 development about a man down the hall acting extremely erratically. He had no known history of drug abuse and no diagnosed psychiatric illnesses. His mother, whom he lived with, as well as many of the neighbors, called 911 multiple times and first responders were allegedly taking their sweet time getting to the scene. He lured his mother out into the hallway and then ran back into the apartment alone and locked the door behind him. He then ran to the kitchen, grabbed the knife, went and turned the shower on, and did the deed. He was picked up by EMS and brought to a local hospital where he was pronounced DOA due to his injuries. No preliminary toxicology was conducted by the hospital. His remains were then picked up by us for examination. Unfortunately for the conclusion of the story, this happened on one of my last days of work after I already put in my 2 weeks notice. Thus, I don't have access to the post-mortem toxicology report to find out why he did it. If the tox is negative for illicit substances, we may, and will likely never know why he actually did it. My personal hypothesis was that he suffered from some form of developmental disorder, and combined with a latent psychiatric illness of some sort, compounded with an unresolved body gender dysmorphia complex, was unable to cope with his feelings and broke. User team op. Propane nat gas explosion. Guy's arm was holding onto a ladder going up a holding tank. No body, no anything, just an arm. Preemptive edit. It was his left arm. So the arm was left? Right. I don't clean them for a living but had to clean a few apartments when my uncle managed an apartment complex. We had one tenant OD on heroin. He sat there for roughly 3 weeks before anyone noticed the smell. They took his body and left it to us to clean up. The dude vomited on the ceiling. There were little dry droplets of vomit all over the ceiling right above where he died, and to top it off he basically liquefied and left a puddle of gut juices on the concrete foundation underneath the carpet. I thought that shit was left to a professional team, but I guess it's optional, and if you don't want to pay for it, you can scoop the brains and blood up yourself. Okay, not a crime scene cleaner but I'm a medic. Have a few bizarre ones. Came into a home to find a man who had attempted to commit suicide by putting a pistol under his door but failed. Had a second thought. He ended up having to crawl 5 feet away to where he had thrown the pistol after only blowing the left side of his face off to finish the job. The second one did the trick. Just about every surface in his living room had some remnant of the poor guy. He left behind 2 kids. Another time we had a husband who had caught his wife cheating and had turned on the garbage disposal and forced her arm down it. Massive hemorrhaging. But unfortunately she was DOA. Husband ended up with a self-inflicted shotgun wound. Sir, people really don't understand just how messy a shotgun can make things. Think the Hulk smashing a blood and brain-filled piñata. And this one was more weird than anything, but here goes. Older gentleman we were called to after police performed a wellness check, late 70s. Nice house. Nice foreign car in the driveway. Pictures of prayers and crosses all over the house. We head into the bedroom and there he is naked except for what I assume was one of those sexy nun-Halloween costumes. Honestly I don't know, but he ended up having a heart attack mid-pleasure time while choking himself with a rosary. Definitely one of the weirdest things I ever saw during my time working the box. So, I work in healthcare. Crazy stuff comes in all the time. One time a woman came in who was shot in the vagina. She was dirty, in only a bra. I thought she was a prostitute tossed from a car. Turns out she was drinking with her BF and another guy. She and the BF got into a fight. Like, serious fight. The BF starts choking her out, so the friend runs upstairs, grabs a gun, and tries to shoot out the legs of the BF. Well, he missed and shot her instead. Took a bit of explaining to clear that up. Edit. I forgot to mention, the lady did fine considering. I don't know all of the legal consequences, or how all of that worked out. A friend of mine is a firefighter and he told me about a scene of a wreck he showed up to. When he arrived there was a Corvette smashed under a trailer of an 18-wheeler. When they finally pulled the two apart, the driver of the Corvette's body was intact in the front seat with cell phone in hand. Meanwhile his head was in the back seat. Turns out he had been going at least 70 miles per hour while texting and didn't realize there was a red light and rammed into the back of an 18-wheeler. Just trying to do my part to get actual crime cleaners here, but I'm a medic, so similar I guess. One time we found this guy dead in his home in the corner of the living room, tucked around the couch, ass up, no cloths on. Literal coffee ground looking shit spread everywhere across the house, on the floors, furniture, walls, everywhere, along with mass amounts of liquor bottles and glass everywhere. He had massive GI issues along with drinking himself to death. Don't know what was worse, the smell or the scene. I was at this house cleaning up a suicide. It was a beautiful young woman in her 20s who had killed herself with her prescribed antidepressant. The investigators had left, so it was just me and my partner there. We just had to put her in a body bag and take her to the morgue. I went out to the ambulance to get the body bag stretcher, walk back in the house to see my partner raping the girl's corpse. The strangest part is that he seemed like a totally normal dude. I would have even said we were friends. He's in prison now. Don't know if this counts as a crime scene, but at my work we had to pick teeth out of a rock garden after a guy blew his head off with a shotgun. I think if people understood just how much of a mess a shotgun to the head makes, then a lot of some suicides would have other methods. Edit. Some people will be considerate, but suicide is often a crime of opportunity. If you make a bridge suicide proof, then you won't see an increase in other suicide methods in that area. This would seem to indicate that the act often happens spontaneously. In the spontaneous cases, I don't think people consider who will find the body, or who will have to clean up the mess. Craziest shit I ever hear as an EMT in training was a cops and EMTs responding to a gunshot wound. Cops where I live have to clear the scene first before medical personnel can go in. They find the guy, head completely missing from the lower mandible upward. Two boys scared shitless hiding under their beds after witnessing him blow his head off with a 12 gauge. Medics where I live are legally required to check for a pulse, as one does in the other. They are tandem. Calls it in. Said dead body stands up and sits back down, then does it 2 more times. The last one puts its hands out like Frankenstein. Keep in mind there is nothing from the jawline up. The second officer said if he does it 1 more time he's shooting him. As morbid as it is, I laughed at that part. Edit. Whoever golded me, thank you, but anyone further please donate it. I suggest Justin Wren's Fight for the Forgotten Organization or any fund for the fires in CA. Oh, I have a story about someone who launched their entrails over a bathroom that's probably 81 square feet. I clean up biohazard material, dead bodies for my company on occasion because I'm one of the only 2 that's certified. My co-worker went into a house to clean a body, but the boss failed to mention they had been dead for 2 weeks. Okay, whatever, I can deal with that. We walked to the house and not only could you smell it from the start of the driveway, but all the windows were black. Okay, this dude had blackout curtains, I understand that. We suited up and went into the house, which was relatively clean given the circumstances. We knew he died in the bathroom, so we made our way upstairs and followed the flies. So, you know how flies swarm decaying things? Yeah, it wasn't blackout curtains in the bathroom. The windows were caked in so many flies that sunlight couldn't come in. My boss also failed to mention he died in the bathtub. You hear about bloating and blah blah blah, but do you know what happens when a body sits in a bathtub for 2 weeks and soaks up all that water? It explodes. The entrails and remains of this soup was all over the taking. The walls, the door, it was everywhere. There was no water in the bathtub, just this sickly pink colored stew. That was the most disgusting cleanup I've done by far. I can't even imagine what it sounded like when that happened. Edit. I love Reddit. Someone reposted my story and got 600 upvotes and gold. Oh well. I do clean up crime scenes, but the best job I've done wasn't a crime scene. An older gentleman ordered a lady of the night for a good time back at his hotel. Popped some Viagra, and while they were doing the deed something in his penis ruptured or tore and blood just started spraying literally everywhere. Blood on the bed, floor, almost every wall, little on the ceiling and a ton on the bathroom mirror. It looked like Dexter's playground. The guy survived. I guess the injury wasn't as bad as the scene would suggest, but holy hell was that an intense job. Not me. My roommate used to clean up crime scenes and all that. Says the worst was the autoerotic asphyxiation guy who died dong in hand. Well, rigor mortis kicks in and this guy's hand muscles end up clamping down on his unit. Hard. Well, roommate and 2 other crew members are on scene to clean it. One of the other guys was apparently new and was going to attempt to move the guy from his hanging perch. Well, because the deceased had clamped down on his unit with the strength of a lobster claw once he was moved, apparently his dong kind of exploded like a literal overfilled blood sausage, spraying everyone with specifically dong blood. From what I understand, the blood was trapped from flowing back into the circulatory system by the lobster grip, and due to how long the guy had been hanging there, it apparently became very rainy and engorged with blood. Gross image made worse by a bursting peen. Surprisingly, that wasn't the event that got roommate to quit either. This is just the most shocking. Edit. Roommate quit because of an event involving children. 8 years old had killed his 5 years old friend relative. Details are fuzzy. As roommate said, pills were the only thing keeping him emotionally numb enough to do the job. Well, roomie's called to the active crime scene to clean up, but sees the killer in the backyard playing like normal as police and adults were just figuring out what to do next. Kid was acting completely normal, no remorse or anything. Roommate couldn't take the surreal and abstract calm this kid was portraying. In hindsight, having the cleanup crew there on that active of a crime scene seems kinda messed up. From what I heard, it was a bloody scene too, and this 8-year-old was already cleaned up and just chilling like no big deal. It wasn't nearly as shocking funny as Mr. Lobster Claw, but was emotionally ducked and roomie couldn't keep doing the work. Further update. Roomie filled in a few more deets on the autoerotic asphyxiation guy. Apparently found after 2 weeks of being dead. Guy was in his own closet peeking through the cracks of his own door, watching porn on a TV in his room, lived alone and was creeping on himself. Said the penis looked like a water wiggly. Go ahead and Google it if you're curious. Hey, one I can answer. I clean up suicides. Decomps, where the person has been dead for days or weeks before being found. And crime scenes. You find the obvious stuff like sex toys, drug paraphernalia. One time I found a maybe fictional, maybe autobiographical journal of how this guy lost his testicles in an angle grinder accident. This same guy had a small metal pipe, like a weed one-hitter, along with some kind of dried fruit, like cherries or small plums, hidden in a box in his closet. It was like he was smoking it. IDK. We are pretty versed in the world of drugs and we couldn't figure that shit out. As many first responders have already pointed out, the amount of brain and skull fragments left behind is a lot bigger than what I would have imagined. Shit, they'll leave eyeballs behind. I've seen over half of an intact brain, a skull fragment big enough to use as a bowl, teeth. They get the biggest part of the body and roll out. They're not gonna spend an hour looking for all the giblets. That's why they pay us the big bucks. What's strange to me is that a lot of adults go to their parents' house to kill themselves. Kinda ducked up. Suicide season is not during the holidays. We are way more busy during spring than the end of the year. The most eerie thing is how often we do suicides in rooms that just look normal. It's hard to explain, but it's just strange to go into a normal looking bedroom with a half-drank Gatorade on the dresser, a half-read book on the nightstand, and a big Olay blood stain on the floor. Also seeing the different ways the families cope with the tragedy. Our service is expensive yo. And there's been times I thought I was gonna get hit when I told them our estimated price. Especially if it's grandma or grandpa that swallowed a bullet and half the ducking family tree is at the house. I've done suicides as young as 12 and as old as 80s. You get the people that are just on autopilot that ask weird questions cause they really aren't on the same plane of existence. We tear out all the carpet in a room if a gun is used. CSF is clear and is also a BBP carrier. So if it looks clean, it might still be contaminated. We've had the carpet pulled and removed and I've had family members ask, while they are looking at the slab concrete, if we are just gonna shampoo the carpet. You get the people that seem almost happy that the person is gone. I've heard people say well now that their kid is gone, we can finally take that cruise. IDK if it's just a coping mechanism or if they're just massive a-holes. I try not to judge. Keyword, try. Obligatory not a crime scene cleaner but my dad was a fireman and had some stories similar to ones in this thread so thought I'd share. One of the worst he ever told me was when working at the Black Saturday bushfires here in Australia. He was doing some checks in houses they had the fire controlled in. They went in 4 or 5 houses and found no one. Then they went into the last house. It was my dad and 2 other guys searching. My dad opens the bathroom door to see a lady holding on to 3 very young between 1 and 5 years old kids who had all been burnt to death. The lady was still alive but very badly burnt and was just sitting there on the floor holding her dead kids in complete shock. Apparently she didn't even react to my dad opening the door. There was also another one where he showed up to a car crash and the driver was missing his head but with no way out of the car. They just assumed it would be in the car somewhere. So they eventually get the car open. Doors were stuck closed, but can't find this guy's head. Turns out it had made it about 20 meters away from the car. My dad said he never figured out how the guy's head was so cleanly cut off or how in the hell it ended so far away from the car. His only theory was the door opened before the crash. The guy slipped and started falling out of the car when he slammed into whatever he hit and the door slammed shut and cut his head off. But he also said that theory doesn't make much sense because the guy was sitting up in the seat when he was found. Whoa, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content bruh. It's free and that's a great price.